You're listening to the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and it's time for this week's Long Island News, the show that talks to newsmakers from Nassau and Suffolk County that matter to Long Island and Long Islanders like you. So each week we'll have a conversation about issues that affect all of us. But this week, moving to something a little different, I thought it might be fun to meet a fellow Long Islander that has made quite a name for himself and introduce you, or him, to you. My guest this week is director, producer, and playwright John Blenn. And John has produced over 80 original plays and more than 90 productions with his all-original theater group, Middle Class American Productions. He has taught music business, theater, screenwriting, mass communications, and history at Five Towns College, and has been their Playwright-In Residence as well. He was also a former editor for Good Times Magazine, a writer for Newsday, and was general manager of what was then known as the Westbury Music Fair. Well, John, welcome to this week's Long Island News.
Very nice to be here, Bill. Thanks for having me.
It's funny, just for the audience sake, I don't know if I want to put an amount or a number of years on it, but I've known you for a long time.
Yeah, going back to the 80s at this point, and it's really kind of neat to be in this building where 46 years ago I started my radio journey. So this is kind of closing a circle in a lot of ways.
Now, one of the things I did, normally, it's supposed to be an interview show. I don't like being an interviewer. I like having a conversation and letting, so to me, that's it. You would probably tell your students in class, don't ever do this. Don't ever just go in cold. But I read your stuff on Facebook. I read, and just for giggles, I Googled your name.
Right.
And I almost fell over when I read all of the things that, even just the names of the plays and the theaters that you've gone in and been in. And then I laughed because you started here, and I thought, I'm still here. You've been all over the place. And but so in the 80s, when I met you, you were I think you were every writer on at Good Times.
I always had a really good support staff there. I was the editor-in-chief, so if anything got missed, it was always kind of on me to pick up the slack, fill the holes, so on and so forth. But no, I always had a really good circle of writers around me that had a lot of passion for doing the job and a lot of heart.
Yeah, and I'm sure you were out 7 nights a week in, all of those, out of the way places that, musicians get to see or have to see.
Yeah, I was out all the time. I mean, it was strange, and it will always be strange because I still do journalism from time to time. But on a Thursday night, you could be at Madison Square Garden and you're backstage with Stevie Nicks, and on a Friday, you're at a club out in Suffolk County, and a pouring rainy night with 9 people there watching a band that can't hit a note on key for cash prizes. And it's just, you sit there going, is this the right choice? And you realize some nights it's a great job, some nights it feels like it's 10 hours when it's only an hour and a half.
Right.
It's like anything else. Every job is not as perfect as it seems or as great as anybody makes it out to be. But
well, at least that has its, there's good days and bad days.
Without a doubt. It's funny, a lot of people point out that I was general manager at Westbury Music Fair for 4 years, and people say that must have been the best job you had out of all of them. And it probably was the worst.
Really?
Because I had the job of general manager, which means any problem you can think of in general is going to land in your lap.
Right.
So I wasn't the guy booking. I wasn't the guy, hanging out with the celebrities backstage 90% of the time. It's you got a problem with some customers. You got a problem with seats. You got the acts having a problem. You got a couple of members of your crew that are arguing with each other.
Right.
It was a lot of problem solving. So when I got there, I had a red beard, and 4 years later when I left, it's basically as gray as you see it is right now. So,
yeah.
People's perception of things is not always accurate. To me, the creative end of things, being a writer, has always been a lot more fun than the technical stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and one of the things I was thinking about too, just going back and thinking about where we've all been. You write on Facebook, and I read all of those things, and I feel like I know your dad.
Yeah, my dad's interesting because he gave me his work ethic, so I never missed work for decades. No matter how sick I was, I showed up to do the job, finish the job, etc. But on the other side of the coin, my dad had absolutely, I shouldn't say 0% interest in the arts. He had no interest beyond cowboy movies and Gene Autry singing. Other than that, no interest in the arts whatsoever.
Wow.
And it kind of peaked because it was very funny. When I was growing up, he would hand me civil service applications every day saying, here, I can get you a job with the county, or I can help you get a job with this town, or, maybe you want to take the police test, because my dad had been a cop. And every night my mom would stand there ripping up these applications and dropping them in the garbage can going, you follow your heart and do what you want to do. You'll never enjoy a moment of your life. And if you need to be artistic, don't listen to what your dad tells you. You go for it. And ultimately, I went to college with one intent in mind, and that was to be a radio DJ. And it's the only thing I haven't been paid for in career-wise in my life.
Right.
But because a lot of other things kind of like bumped me, almost like the bumpers in a pinball game, I wound up just simply moving a few inches to one side to become a print journalist instead. And looking back, that was the best thing that could have happened to me, and it was the way it was really supposed to go, because that led to everything else I've been able to do in my life.
Right. Well, your writing is, it's incredible. I get sucked into those stories.
Thank you.
I was going to ask you, do you have a book out?
No, I'm working on one right now. Actually, I'm working on a couple of them. One of them's on the comedy scene out here over the last 30 years, and another one is on basically just my journey throughout the business. Although I'm starting to get a lot of, you should just take these short stories that you write on Throwback Thursdays every week and just compile them and put them in a book.
Well, I'll vote for that.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of that. And I got to tell you, it surprises me, because I don't often think in that manner that's what people want to see or hear or read, but I'm finding out quickly that the most simple human connecting stories are far more important to people these days than, oh, look, you met Frank Sinatra, or look at you having a cocktail with Barbra Streisand. That doesn't mean what it used to mean to people.
Right.
And the things that we thought didn't matter that much to people mean a whole lot more now to people.
Yeah. Well, people don't want to wait till Thursday. They want to get it all in one compilation. So
yeah, you're mouth to a publisher's ears, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I enjoy them. I've read, you told stories about your mom and your dad, and I can identify with your dad. My dad was kind of stoic, but he didn't grow up. He wasn't brought up. He was dragged up.
Right.
And it was evident in his, the way he dealt with me. He didn't really know what he was doing.
Right.
And so I identify with that 100%.
I think our generation came from parents that more times than not did struggle with that. I mean, my dad was the youngest of four in a very poor family growing up out here in Hempstead, actually. And my mom was the eldest of six in an equally poor family from Syracuse. But my grandmother was kind of like the unofficial mayor of Syracuse. She was just a pistol and funny as hell wherever she went in her life. And my dad came from a family where his father was usually absent or not in any kind of functioning condition, and his mother was always very stoic and serious and kind of favored two other sons. So my dad would work, bring home money for the family, and most of it would go to keep the house afloat along with his eldest brother, but some of it would wind up in the pocket of like the favored son to like get yourself a new suit or whatever else. So he kind of fought his way through all of that stuff, and I don't think that having a single brother, I ever felt like either one of us were favored.
Right.
But then again, we were 10 years apart, so that takes a lot of that out of the mix.
Yeah. But you would think that that result came from him having been treated the way he was.
Without a doubt.
I'm never going to do that to somebody I know. Yeah.
Yeah, he was as pragmatic as they built him. I mean, he's the kind of guy that I don't ever remember seeing him like eat ice cream or dessert until he got to his 80s.
Really?
He was just like, he was always in really good shape, but he just wouldn't indulge in those kind of things. He was always very, very serious about it. And and when he suddenly developed that love of ice cream in his 80s and 90s, doctors say, well, everything goes like in your taste buds as you're aging, but the sweetness is the stuff that seniors can still taste. That's exactly why he seems to be a totally different guy all of a sudden,
right?
Because that's what he's still able to enjoy the most at this point, and other things that he used to like when he was younger, he probably can't taste them anymore.
Yeah. Wow.
And he made it just short of 99. But the other thing I was going to add about him was he went with me to the movie theater when the movie Here Comes the Boom came out, and I had a small part in it.
I saw it.
And I came up on the screen, and I'm kind of looking at him. And ironically, my wife was in Florida on a trip to visit her sister when it came out, so she went to see it with her sister. I went with my dad, and my dad was staring at me on the screen like he was basically waiting for a traffic light to change. And nothing. And when the show was over with, I looked at it and went, well, I'm really happy I made the cut and wound up in the movie, as small as it was. And he's like, oh, yeah. Huh. Like, nothing. Like, hey, you made it, or hey, I get it after all these years. I realized it's just never going to be fun.
Yeah, right.
And meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, I got he and my mom into shows when I was a journalist. I would get tickets because my mom wrote for my paper too.
Right.
So if they wanted to go see Perry Como, I'd get us Perry Como tickets for the paper and send her to cover the show. And my dad would go along with it. And I don't think he ever connected the dots on that. Everything I did allowed them to go to a lot of places without having to reach for his wallet.
Right.
But yet on the other side of the coin, he's like, "Oh, you haven't got a good retirement plan, and I don't know what you were thinking." And
yeah, right.
That's that era.
It's like there's always something. There's always something. Yeah, I get that. I think like my dad, he played guitar because it was the only way he was going to get in with my mother's family. He realized I got to play an instrument, But he, I think he struggled with stage fright. I never really saw him playing out. It was always in Grandma's basement. That's where we started.
Right.
And and I think he tried to dissuade. He kind of didn't like the idea that I was hip on going out and playing that kind, because I think maybe at some point he had his heart broken by music.
Right.
And figured that was going to be the same thing for me.
Right.
And meanwhile, I don't care what comes from it. I love doing it. It's the moment.
Absolutely.
It's
there's a purity to all arts, as you know, whether it's comedy, whether it's stand-up comedy, or it's acting, or it's music. There's that moment when you connect with an audience where you know absolutely that there's been a sync-up between both sides, and it's unlike anything else on the planet.
True.
People always ask me why I liked doing theater so much. I said, because I wrote contemporary comedies, and they might politely applaud you, but they don't politely laugh at you, because if they politely laugh at you, you know it.
Right.
It's not true, and they're just trying to be civil about things. But when they really laugh because you got them, there's a 100% connection that you took them from whatever's bothering them, whatever's wrong in their life, and put them someplace else, even for those few seconds.
Yep.
And with music, it's not so much, I think, an oral thing from an audience as you see that look in their eyes. You can see that connection as the people who are up close to the stage where you are, that they are 100% in sync with what you're pouring out to them.
Yeah, that's so true. And the chill that you get up your spine when you realize that it's happened. So now you were here at Nassau Community College around
77 through the end of 79. So I at both Hofstra and Nassau Community College took the 5-semester plans. It's just like, am I really 2 courses short at Nassau? I am. Am I really 2 courses short over here at Hofstra? I am. So that's exactly what led to me doing it over 5 years instead of 4.
Right. Well, and not wanting to leave. I had a great time there.
I agree with you completely. I was still in the air at Hofstra for about 8 months after I graduated, and just having so much fun doing that radio show around working out in the open world. It's like you don't want to go.
Yeah.
But it comes a time you got to make that move.
I'm what they call here a community volunteer. So we could do a show. We could just put it together. You let them see it, and they decide whether or not they'll put you on the air. So.
Oh, very cool.
Think about that.
I will. I definitely will.
Okay, so now after good time, when did you start at Five Towns College?
I started teaching at Five Towns College in 2001, and it was kind of interesting because I had, or I should say 2000, I had been working for my own paper at that point, which is called Long Island Entertainment or The Lie, which I started with my wife after I left Good Times, and we had that for about 5.5, 6 years before we sold it. And the reason I sold it was I was in at Westbury Music Fair, and they said, we have a publicist who's leaving, and we hired one who's graduating from college, but we have a 4-month gap. Would you be able to be a temporary publicist for us? And I said, sure. So I took the job, and I had a kid named Darren Poucherwitz, who has since become a very successful writer in the business. He was a real prodigy. He was from down the block in my old neighborhood in North Belmore. And I said, I trust you with being the editor of the paper at this point, and I'll oversee around what I'm doing at Westbury. So I juggled both. And then I was at Westbury maybe about 2 months, and all of a sudden Five Towns College walked in and said, we'd like to talk to you about teaching. Would you come in tomorrow so we can have a chat? So I went in the following day, not having any idea what they wanted to talk about. And they said, okay, here's a salary. We set it up so you can teach from 9 until 9:50 in the morning. You'll start in the fall. This way it won't interfere with your work here at West. They had everything plotted out. Oh. So it just simply became yes or no, do you want to do it?
Right.
And I figured, well, okay, I'll give it a shot. And they asked me to teach artist management, which I had done with several artists, as you well know, working with your band Once Upon a Time, with Peter Chelsea and T.C. Cross and a host of others. Yeah. And on the other side of the coin, they wanted me to teach concert production, which obviously I was doing every day at Westbury Music Fair.
Right.
So I accepted it, and I think they figured if they got a couple of years out of me, it would be pretty good, and it wound up being actually 22 years total. And the thing I don't think they planned on was I had been on stage. I had been a guest lecturer before. I had done theater, so I was not the least bit shy about getting up and talking, and I was not the least bit hesitant to teach two things that I had already lived.
Right.
So I didn't even need their textbook. I could have written them one if they wanted one.
Right.
So I felt comfortable with what they asked me to do there. So that's how that came into place with me teaching for Five Towns. And I came to realize, as there's always a catch a couple of years in, that the reason they wanted me was they love, as every company does, to have titles. And they love to say, and among the people on our staff is this gentleman from Live Nation and this person from, So they wanted those Live Nation credentials through me by hiring me. What they didn't plan on was that I would actually be effective at doing it. Right. And so I wound up staying a long time. And I didn't really have any preconceived notions of going to do it, but it turned out to be the longest I was in one place on anything.
Wow.
I mean, obviously, I've been a journalist for 46 years, but 14 of those were with Good Times, and 2 of those were with the Islandeer, and 6 of them were with Long Island Entertainment. And then there's a little Newsday freelancing, and then there was 8, 9 other papers. It's Hip that came and went that I was with for 3 years here, 4 years there, so on and so forth. So, but Westbury Music Fair wound up being a shorter stay than I thought it would, and Five Towns became a much longer stay than I ever thought it would.
Right. Now, was it the transition to Five Towns that kind of pushed you more into theater?
Well, when I went to Five Towns College and was teaching for them 4 years in, I was pulled aside by the general manager at Westbury, Jason Stone, who had hired me. He said, I just want to warn you that they're going to combine the general manager positions between the beach and here. So there'll be one of you, not 2 of you. Mm. And the guy at Jones Beach is a guy named Adam Citron, who's still there, who was the general manager at Westbury and trained me before going to Jones Beach. Okay. And I said, well, I appreciate the heads up because he's the best general manager of a building I've ever seen in my life. He's brilliant.
Right.
And he's been in the business forever. He's got family ties, eats, breathes. Like, he's that guy that when you call him, he's like, I need to be on the black in Bethpage with Engelbert Humperdinck tomorrow morning to play golf. It's like he'll make that phone call and they'll get it done in 30 seconds. I'm not that good. Wow. Not that good yet. I don't know if I'll ever be that good, but thanks. So I went over to Five Towns and said, I don't know how much longer I'll be teaching for you. But they said, well, you could be the general manager of our theater around all the teaching if you're willing to do that. So that started an 11-year run with them as a general manager at their theater besides teaching.
Right. So you're in the middle of people who are studying acting and studying theater I guess, mechanics. A lot of stage managers, and people don't realize that I'm going into theater. They think automatically actor.
Right.
That's it. But they don't realize how many peripheral jobs, are there. I got to do some business.
Sure.
You're listening to this week's Long Island News on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and today we're talking with director, producer, and playwright, and I'm sure there's a few more things I could put in there, Mr. John Blenn.
So anyway, the way I became the Playwright-In Residence in there was right before I made the transition from Westbury Music Fair to their theater. Stanley Cohen, the president of Five Towns, came in to see a play I did called The St. Francis Show. And it was a piece about a guy who finds out that his mother is on her deathbed in Colorado. He lives in Chicago, and he flies to see her off and finds out that it's a day-to-day thing that she's going to pass. He's the last living relative. So the entire thing is kind of a bittersweet comedy dramedy about him hanging out in the waiting room with everybody else waiting for impending disaster. But they find the humor and the humanity, and he kind of draws everybody in the room who's in their own little private hell out until they kind of become almost like a team of people. And there's a lot of humor through it because he convinces these people that it's a hidden camera like Tonight Show. And he starts finding out who can sing and who wants to interviews him about all kinds of crazy stuff. But the president of the school saw it, absolutely loved it, said, you got to bring it over to our school. And when I brought it over to Five Towns, they built me a stage. They set me up with it. And he said, you got to be the Playwright-In Residence here at the school. I'm like, done.
Wow.
I'm in. And then right after that, I became the general manager of the theater there as well. So everything just kind of fell into place. It was weird. A lot of my students said to me, what's the key to going out and convincing somebody to hire you? And I said, I'm not really sure. Because
you haven't done that.
Because since I started with Good Times, every job I ever got in my life was, hey, do you want to work here? Not, hi, can I give you a resume or whatever else? It was just one of those things. So I've been very blessed.
Yeah, well, you did it. You did it the right way. You put your head down and you went to work, and people noticed what you did, and then the offers just start to stack up. I mean, and your focus of interest is pretty wide. When you're not just one avenue. I could just label you Mr. Entertainment.
Well,
and only in one sense, because there are a lot of other things you do that aren't necessarily entertainment. Right. But to me, that's fascinating.
That's something I stress to every kid I ever taught, whether it was concert production or artist management or other things. I mean, there were a couple of semesters at that school where John Kelly, who was our chairperson of the liberal arts, guy I loved, who left a few years ago, he'd walk up to me in the hallway and go, look, I know you've been an editor for years. I know you can teach compositional English. Would you be willing to do it? And it's like, if you're in a pinch, yeah. He goes, great. Here's the textbooks for 1 and 2. Tomorrow morning at 10, 12, and 2. I just had somebody walk out at the last minute. I was like, okay.
Wow.
And that happened to me like on 3 different years where all of a sudden I got a textbook with, we got to have you do this because we just lost a teacher and tomorrow's the first day of school. We couldn't even find somebody fast. Right. And in each case, I said to them, look, if you're going to go hire another replacement, I'm not going to do this for 3 weeks. I'm in all the way or I'm not in. And, that's the way it worked out.
But because of your experience, I mean, it's nice to be able to take on a thing like that and say, you know what, I can do this.
I kind of bent the curriculum too, where you're supposed to be writing about, okay, here, read this short story about a guy who builds a car engine and write a 6-page paper on it. You'd be amazed how much more you get out of kids who are aspiring artists, and you say, I'd like you to write a 6-page paper out of the most amazing friendship you've ever had in your life and explain in detail why. And these kids responded, and their grades went up because they were plugged into what they were writing. Five Towns is nothing if not an art school. That's the entire focus there. You want to be on TV, you want to make movies, you want to be a Broadway actor, you want to play bass guitar, you want to be a jazz drummer. Right. That's where you go. Right. You don't go to Five Towns College because you're interested in studying nuclear energy. It's not what they do.
Right.
So, you try and get the kids on a path where it makes sense to them.
Yeah.
And
that's exciting stuff, though.
And I also told the kids, too, as I started to say, that no matter what you're doing, take the job closest to what it is you want. You can't always pick the job you want. When I first got out and I couldn't get arrested at a radio job, I went to work for a record chain, but you got free albums from the guy hanging stuff in the stores. You always knew what was coming out that was new, and you were in position so that when an editor's job opened up at Good Times, like, well, you know the music? Yes, I do.
Yeah, right.
And you just sidestep. You better have the ability to write when the time comes, but at least you know what you're writing about because you're being subjected to that stuff all day long.
Yeah, well, you seem to always kind of be in your element.
Try to be.
If maybe just a little displaced from your previous thing, but the span is incredible. And when did you first decide I'm going to write something?
Here at Nassau Community College, because I grew up reading Cream magazine was my major influence, which was always kind of funny and a little bit irreverent, and brilliantly written for that matter. And those were the guys that inspired me more than like Circus and Rolling Stone. It was like the guys that had a little bit of a sense of humor. Don't take it too seriously, but find the value in it. And because I was inspired by them, when I came here to Nassau, it's like, well, let me see if I can maybe get a job to write. So I came in here to the paper and I said, if you guys ever need somebody to write, it's like, we got a Roy Buchanan show tonight. The guy was supposed to do it dropped out. Okay, you'd be here at 8 o'clock, go down to the Rathskeller, and that was it. And I went down there and I brought the thing back in the following days. Like, I told you I didn't need it for like 5 days. Like, I was excited. I got home and I wrote it. It's like, looks it over, he goes, okay, it seems like it's somewhat intelligent. Okay, thanks. That was it. And I thought, well, okay, that's the last I'm going to hear of him. And a couple of days later, he calls me back again. And he goes, I'm going to call you on any of the other things we have coming up here. So that's what started it.
Right.
And Roy Buchanan, I guess, technically was like the first celebrity I ever talked to from a professional perspective.
Right.
He's a brilliant guitar player that's every blues guy in the world knows exactly who he is. And the general populace has very little idea who he is, despite a pile of albums from everybody from Atlantic Records right on down the line to custom blues labels. But yeah, he was absolutely brilliant here. Couldn't have been nicer. Was an absolute gentleman to me and seemed to be legitimately excited that I was there to be asking him about his performance in his show. And I didn't realize until years later, like, who am I and what did I matter to somebody? But then you realize in a lot of these cases, it's a lonely gig. And most of the time you're out there playing your shows, but it doesn't mean somebody's coming backstage in Mississippi to go, I'm from the local newspaper, I'm writing an article about you. You don't get as many of those as you think you're going to get being out on the road. So every time somebody emerges that gives you a little bit of press or shows some excitement about what you're doing, it means a lot to them. That was kind of what got me started on it. And I came to realize after blitzing the Midwest and putting demo tapes out all over the place and not getting called for over a year from any of a couple hundred places that I dropped demo tapes off of, that maybe I'm supposed to be a writer instead. And one thing led to another with Good Times, where I took a sales job, and within 2 months the editor quit and I was the heir apparent for the job, and the rest, as they say, is history. Yeah. But so many people that I went and did radio with as a kid were out of radio within 10 years, 12 years, and certainly just about every one of them done by 50. I realized that was a change I was supposed to be, because at 50, I'm working with Eddie Money and I'm doing still different things that radio would have never allowed me the opportunity to get into. Right.
I'm kind of in tune to that kind of thing as far as being the older guy, and I ignore the number. I just ignore the number, and invariably so does everybody else when you're doing what you love to do. Okay. Well, my guest today has been director-producer, playwright John Blenn, and we do still have so much to talk about. What are you doing next week?
I'm in.
Great. So anyway, tune in next week for part 2 of my conversation with John Blenn, because right now the clock on the wall says it's time for this week's Long Island News to get on out of here. Well, I'm Bill McIntyre. Remember, you can listen to us by searching for this week's Long Island News wherever you listen to podcasts, and we're right here on the radio every Friday at 3 p.m. on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.